Outside the window, the sky was beginning to lighten, turning a soft pink. Rapid City was still asleep, and only the occasional car broke the morning silence. My backyard, which Hank had once planted with me, looked especially peaceful now. An old apple tree, planted the year Glenn was born, now towered over the entire lot. My husband hadn't lived to see how huge it had become. I sighed, remembering Hank saying, "That apple tree will outlive us all, Ruthie." It hadn't outlived me either. I remembered how I had once dreamed of being a teacher. I even went to college as a night student in 1973. Hank supported me, even though money was tight. He worked construction, and I worked part-time as a cashier at the supermarket. Then Glenn came along, Shelley 4 years later, and my textbooks gradually moved from my desk to the top shelf of my closet, and then disappeared during one of the moves. "Grandma, did you stay up again?" The voice of Travis, my 15-year-old grandson, snapped me out of my memories. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, tall and gangly, with his overgrown hair falling over his eyes. Of all the grandchildren, Travis was the only one who sometimes noticed me, the real me, not just the convenient grandmother who cooks, cleans, and doesn't complain. "Morning, sweetie. Would you like some pancakes?" I smiled, trying to hide my tiredness. "No, Grandma, you cook enough as it is." He stepped closer and awkwardly stroked my shoulder. "Let me help with something." His parents, Glenn and Darlene, had arrived last night and stayed the night, ostensibly to not leave me alone before the big day. In reality, I knew that Darlene just wanted to make sure that all the meals were in line with her ideas of proper nutrition. They brought Travis along, even though he begged to be left at home with his friends. "You can set up tables in the yard if you want," I suggested, knowing that my grandson would prefer any physical work to small talk. Travis nodded with obvious relief and headed for the door. He turned around on the threshold. "You know, Grandma, I'm sorry you have to do all this." Before I could answer, Darlene's voice came from the stairs. "Travis, you're not wearing a shirt. How many times do I have to tell you we don't live in a barn?" My grandson rolled his eyes, but obediently went upstairs. By noon, the yard was filled with voices. Shelley had arrived with her 3 kids, Brittany, Kyle, and little Amber. As I expected, she didn't help, but immediately sat down with a glass of wine, complaining about her ex-husband who doesn't even pay child support regularly. Her children immediately scattered around the yard. The older ones stuck to their phones, and 4-year-old Amber started breaking flowers from my flower bed. "Mommy, do you have any ice?" Shelley didn't even take her eyes off her phone as she turned to me. "I could use some in my wine." "I'll get it." I headed toward the house, trying in passing to stop Amber from destroying my petunias. "Leave the baby alone, Mom," Shelley said irritably. "They're just flowers that I'd been growing since early spring, tending to every sprout." But I didn't say anything. In recent years, I'd kept my thoughts to myself more and more often. When I returned with the ice tray, I saw that Verna and her husband had arrived. My neighbor and only real friend waved at me, but was immediately intercepted by Darlene, who was talking enthusiastically about her recent promotion at the insurance company. Glenn was standing at the grill, confidently turning the meat as if I hadn't been the one marinating it all last night. "Mom," he called out to me, "get some more sauce. This one's almost done. Not a please, Mom. Or, if it's not too much trouble, Mom." Just an indication like I was one of the kitchen utensils, useful but silent. I walked into the kitchen feeling the fatigue spreading through my body. Through the window, I could see my family, laughing, talking, completely oblivious to my absence. I wonder if they would have noticed if I had just disappeared. Or would they have just looked for sauce and then ordered pizza? The kitchen window had a great view of the patio where Glenn and Darlene had set up a little nook for themselves away from the other guests. I grabbed the sauce and was about to leave when I heard my name. "Mom is becoming a problem," Glenn said, lowering his voice. I froze at the window, trying to breathe quietly. "Did you see her forget the mailman's name last week?" Darlene sounded concerned, but I knew that tone. She used it when she wanted to get rid of the inconvenient people in the office. "The same one that's been coming in every day for the last 10 years. "It could be the beginning of dementia," Glenn agreed. "Dr. Harris said we should be alert for such signs." I clutched the sauce jar so hard my knuckles turned white. I hadn't forgotten the mailman's name. I was just upset because I'd gotten a bill this morning for medication that was getting more and more expensive. How dare they talk about me like I'm senile? At her age, it's to be expected, Darlene sighed with feigned sympathy. My Aunt Martha used to forget little things, and a year later she couldn't remember how to use the stove. The house is too big for her alone, Glenn continued. She doesn't even go up to the second floor except to her bedroom, and it costs a lot of money to keep her. We could find her something smaller, Darlene suggested, and I could almost physically feel the greedy gleam in her eyes. Or, given her condition, perhaps we should consider more specialized options. What are you talking about? Glenn asked, but I could tell from his tone that he knew the answer. We could consider a nursing home, Darlene said bluntly, and the words hit me in the butt. It would be even better for her. Constant care, socializing with people her own age, and the house could be sold or maybe rented out. I jerked away from the window, feeling the blood drain from my face. All this time, I'd thought they came every Sunday out of concern, out of love, and they were just looking after their investment, the house that would be theirs when I was written off. Memories came in waves. Here I was, sitting at 6-year-old Glenn's bedside, keeping his fever down with cold compresses all night. Here I was, taking a double shift at the supermarket to pay for Shelley's dance lessons. Here I was, turning down a promotion to manager because my new schedule wouldn't allow me to pick up the kids from school. All my life, I've put their needs before my own. And here it was, gratitude. I remembered my mother's words to me before I got married. Ruth, remember, you can only count on yourself in this life. I didn't listen then. Maybe it was time I listened now. Mom, where's the sauce? Glenn's voice brought me back to reality. I mechanically stepped out into the yard, handed him the jar, and walked to the far table. Something inside me had finally broken, or maybe it had mended. For 36 years, I had lived in this house. I had given birth to my children here, buried my husband here, planted a garden here. This house had been a witness to my life's joys and sorrows, and now my own children wanted to snatch it away from me, as if I were an uninvited guest lingering after a party. Grandma, are you not feeling well? Travis asked quietly, sitting down next to me. You look pale. It's okay, honey. I tried to smile. I'm just a little tired. Hey, everybody! Darlene shouted, raising her glass. Let's drink to our wonderful mother and grandmother who brought us all together. Fake toast, fake smiles. Now I saw it more clearly than ever. Here's to you, Mom. Glenn raised his glass, looking at me with the same smile he'd once used to beg for a new bike. I nodded, unable to utter a word. Inside, rage boiled, silent but all-consuming. They wanted my house? Well, I'll give them a lesson they'll never forget. That evening, when everyone had gone, leaving me with a mountain of dirty dishes and a trashed yard, I sat in the silence of the living room. The old clock, still Hank's 10th anniversary present, ticked on the wall, counting down the minutes of my new life. I pulled out the phone book and found a number I never thought I'd dial. New Horizons Real Estate Agency, how can I help you? It was a cheerful female voice. My name is Ruth Morgenthaler, I said, surprised at the firmness of my voice. I'd like to consult about selling my house. The realtor, Linda Bryce, was a woman my age with a short haircut and an attentive eye for detail. She inspected the house with professional restraint, jotting something down in a notebook while I nervously fumbled with the buttons on my sweater. 1,950, she said thoughtfully, tapping the walls in the living room. But you keep it in excellent condition, Mrs. Morgenthaler. It's just Ruth, I smiled, feeling oddly proud of her. Hank had always taken care of the house, patching the roof, changing the wiring, painting the walls. After he died, I learned to fix leaky faucets and rickety stairs on my own. One winter, I fixed the boiler using video instructions from the internet. Travis helped me find the right video. The kids didn't find out until a week later, when Glenn stopped by to see if I was cold. I remember his surprised face when he realized I'd done it on my own. The location is excellent, Linda continued, looking out the window. The proximity to the school and the mall adds value. Have you considered renting instead of selling? I shook my head. Renting out the house would mean keeping the thread that tied me to my past. I wanted to cut it with one decisive blow. I'd rather sell, and as soon as possible. Linda looked at me carefully. I don't usually ask, but if it's no secret, why the rush? It could affect the price. I was silent, not knowing what to answer. Should I tell her the truth? That my own children were planning to send me to a nursing home and take the house? It sounded pathetic even in my head. I want to start a new life, I finally uttered. I'm 68, but I hope it's not too late. Linda nodded sympathetically. It's never too late, Ruth. Trust me. When she left, promising to contact potential buyers, I went up to the second floor and opened the door to Glenn's former room. It was now filled with old things that were miserable to throw away, but that no one used, our family's history in cardboard boxes. I pulled one out labeled Hank Personal on the lid. On top was our wedding photo August 1969. Me in a simple white dress made by my mother, Hank in a rented suit. We looked so young, so confident about the future. I was 20 years old. He was 23. We met at a gas station where I worked part-time during the summer. He stopped to fill up his shabby Ford and spilled coffee on my uniform shirt. Embarrassed, he apologized endlessly. 6 months later, we were married. Under the photo, I found a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. Letters from Hank when he went to Minnesota for 3 months to work. Glenn was only 2 years old then. We were barely making ends meet. I'll be back soon, Ruthie, and things will get better. Kisses to you and the baby. Things did get better, though not right away. Hank got a full-time job with a construction company, and I worked as a cashier at Pioneer, the local supermarket. I wanted to study further, dreamed of becoming a teacher. At the bottom of the box, I found my college acceptance letter. Hank was so proud of me then. His Ruth, the first in the family to go to college. But then Shelley was born, and Glenn had asthma, and I was out of school. But the kids grew up, and I stayed on as a cashier. I was promoted to head cashier at 45 and retired at 55. By that time, my dreams of teaching had faded and scattered like old photographs. A phone call snapped me out of my memories. It was Shelley. Mom, I have to leave for a job interview in Denver right away, she rambled without greeting. It's a chance for a real job, you know. I'll have the kids here in an hour. Shelley, I can't, I tried to object. I have a meeting with, but my daughter had already hung up. I sighed, putting the box back on the shelf. Well, I could still watch the grandkids one last time. Shelley arrived an hour and a half later, unloading the kids and bags from the car as she went. It's 3 days tops, she explained, shoving a bag of Amber's stuff into my hands. Kyle's allergic to strawberries, don't forget. And Brittany needs to be taken to choir practice by 3 tomorrow. Shelley! I tried to stop the flow. You can't just leave them. I'm 68. I have my own things to do. My daughter looked at me like I was crazy. What could you possibly have more important things to do than grandchildren? You're retired. It's as simple as that. I'm retired, so my time is worthless. My life is an empty space to be filled with other people's responsibilities. If you're having a hard time, I can call Glenn, Shelley added, clearly not realizing that this was not a solution but another problem. Have Darlene pick them up. No need, I sighed. I can handle it. She kissed me on the cheek and sped away, leaving 3 kids and a mountain of problems. Brittany immediately locked herself in her mother's former room with the phone. Kyle turned the TV up to full volume, and 4-year-old Amber started whining about wanting her mommy. I looked at them and wondered. After all I had planned, would I be able to see my grandchildren? Would they want to know the grandmother who robbed their parents of their home? These thoughts made me hurt, but I chased them away. My children had made their choice. Now it was my turn. The next day, Linda called with unexpected news. There's an interested buyer, she said. Midwest Development. They're buying up property in your neighborhood to build a shopping center. A shopping center? I was confused. You mean they're tearing down the house? Yes, Linda confirmed. But they're offering a very good price above market value. They've already purchased the Thompson property next door. You know, that could be good for you. I was silent, digesting the information. My house will be torn down. There would be nothing left of it, not the walls that remembered my childhood laughter, not the kitchen where Hank had once surprised me on my anniversary, not the apple tree we'd planted together. Strangely, the thought of it brought unexpected relief. If the house disappeared physically, maybe the ghosts of the past would disappear too. Set up a meeting, I decided. I want to hear their proposal. Glenn arrived that evening, ostensibly to check on Shelley's children, but really to see if the house was in order. He went through all the rooms, scrutinizing the ceiling in the bathroom, where there had once been a leak, and feeling the radiators. Is the heating acting up? He asked, frowning. We'll have to call a handyman. It's working fine, I replied, watching him scrutinize my house. You don't know what you're doing, Mom, Glenn said. Trust me, I'll send my boyfriend over next week. I didn't say a word. In a week, there would be no more house and no more heating problems. Darlene joined us at dinner, looking critically around the table. Do you make pasta? With your blood pressure? She shook her head. I brought quinoa salad, much healthier. She put some kind of gray mass on the plate. Amber looked at it with horror and cried. Kyle defiantly pushed the plate away, and Brittany rolled her eyes and asked if she could eat in her room. Of course you can't, Darlene said. In this house, we eat together as a family. I was struck by the ease with which she commanded my house. It was as if she already considered it her own. After dinner, as the children scattered to their rooms, I overheard Glenn and Darlene talking in the kitchen. They were talking quietly, but in an old house, sounds travel in strange ways. If you sold it, you could get $300,000, Glenn said, plus her retirement savings. What do you suggest? Darlene asked. A nursing home in Rapid City is expensive. There's a good one in Spearfish, my son replied. I checked. It's a decent place and a lot cheaper. Spearfish. It's a town about 90 miles from here. Far enough away that I don't have to visit my old mother too often. What about the rest of the money? Darlene asked. Well, technically it's Mom's, Glenn stretched out. But we could help her manage the finances. It would only be a burden on her. Travis College? Darlene said thoughtfully. And a remodel of our kitchen. And a new car for you, Glenn added. Yours was a wreck. I stood against the wall, shaking with rage. They'd already split my money. Money I hadn't even gotten from the sale of the house I still lived in. Fury was replaced by cold determination. I'm going to make this right. The Midwest Development representatives were surprisingly young. 2 men in identical dark suits, carrying identical clipboards. They smiled politely, calling me ma'am, and assuring me that the deal would be as comfortable for me as possible. We realize it's not easy to part with a family home, said one of them, Jeffrey, I think. But our offer is above market value, and we are ready to close the deal as soon as possible. How much are you offering? I asked bluntly. When Jeffrey named the amount, I almost whistled. It was almost double what Glenn had quoted. That's very generous, I said, but why? The other man, Marcus, unfolded some kind of drawing on the table. You see, your lot completes the block we plan to use for a mini-mall. All the neighboring houses have already been purchased by us. Your house is the last piece of the mosaic. I looked at the plan where my house was circled in red, the last stronghold of the past in a neighborhood looking to the future. When do you plan to demolish it? I asked, surprised at my own calmness. 2 weeks after the deal closes, Jeffrey replied. Of course, if you need more time to move. No, I interrupted. 3 days would be fine. They looked at each other, clearly surprised by my determination. In that case, can we have the paperwork ready by, say, Friday? Marcus suggested. We'll close the deal on Monday. Deal. I held out my hand, and both men shook it in turn. When they left, I went upstairs to my bedroom with Hank. I went to the window looking out into the backyard at the apple tree that had been growing here longer than Glenn had walked this earth. I'm sorry, old girl, I whispered to the tree. You're going to have to leave, too. By the weekend, Shelley's kids were still staying with me. My daughter had called to let me know that the interview went great, and she'd been invited to the second round. She'd be staying a couple more days. I didn't argue. A plan had already formed in my head. On Sunday, I invited the whole family over for dinner. Special occasion, I said without going into details. Glenn came with Darlene and Travis. Shelley came straight from the bus station. I made everything they liked. Roast beef for Glenn, potato salad for Shelley, apple cinnamon pie for the grandkids. Darlene, of course, brought her quinoa salad, which no one but her would eat. When everyone was seated at the table, I felt a strange calmness. Years of worry and doubt, years of trying to please everyone were all in the past. So, Mom, what's the occasion? Glenn asked, tapping his fork impatiently on the table. Did you finally decide to sort through Dad's stuff in the garage? I smiled. No, Glenn. I sold the house. There was such silence that I could hear the clock ticking from the living room. What do you mean you sold the house? Shelley was the first to break the silence. Is this some kind of joke? No, honey, I'm signing the papers tomorrow, and in 3 days we all have to vacate the premises. I cut off a piece of beef and put it in my mouth, savoring the flavor and everyone's stupor. You can't just sell the house, Glenn exploded. This is the family nest. We all grew up here. I can, I argued calmly. The house is in my name, and I sold it to Midwest Development. They're gonna build a mini-mart here. A mini-mart? Darlene exclaimed. You sold the house for demolition? Her face contorted as if she had taken a bite of lemon. They offered a good price, I shrugged. And you know, at my age, a big house is just a burden. I'll be in a nursing home soon, as you pointed out the other day. Darlene blushed. Were you eavesdropping? She hissed. In your own house? Yes, imagine that. Shelley burst into tears. Mom, but what about us? I have 3 kids. I'm the only one raising them. Where are we going to go? I don't know, honey, I said honestly. Maybe you should think about that before you leave them in the care of your elderly mother without warning. Glenn pounded his fist on the table. This is crazy. You're out of your mind. We're going to challenge this deal. On what grounds? I looked him straight in the eye. I'm of sound mind and good judgment. All the paperwork's in order. And I even found myself a new apartment. Small, cozy, just for me. But the money, Darlene began and stopped, catching her husband's warning glance. Oh, that's it, I nodded. The money. Don't worry, I'm not going to spend it on Travis's college or your new car, Darlene. That's what I heard too. Travis, who had been silent all this time, suddenly stood up from the table. Did you discuss how you were going to spend Grandma's money? He looked at his parents with disgust. Really? Travis, you don't understand, Glenn began. It's all for your future. My future? Travis laughed. You wanted to send Grandma to some shithole to buy Mom a new car, and you call that my future? There was a heavy pause. I looked at my grandson with unexpected pride. At least one member of the family had grown up different from the rest. 3 days, I repeated. You have 3 days to pack and find a new place to live. I've already packed most of mine. And yes, I'm taking all the silverware, crystal, and my mom's jewelry with me. You can't do that to us, Shelley whispered. No, honey, I shook my head. You couldn't do that to me, but you did. Now who wants apple pie? My new apartment was in an old 3-story building on the eastern edge of Rapid City, next to the railroad tracks. Every morning at 6:15, a freight train would pass by, making the window panes rattle. At night, I would wake up to the honking and scraping of metal, but strangely, I found comfort in those sounds. They reminded me that life goes on, moving forward regardless of my decisions. The apartment was small, just 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen and a living room overlooking the railroad. After the spacious 2-story house, it seemed like a shoebox. But I was relieved to no longer have to climb long stairs when my knees refused to serve, or try to heat empty rooms that no one had entered in years. On the first day, I arranged the few things I'd taken with me. Hank's favorite chair, our family photos, the ones where we were still happy, the sewing machine he'd given me for my 30th birthday. The wooden cuckoo clock now hung on the wall opposite the window. Hank had brought it back from a trip to Germany when he worked on a military base in 1978. In the evening, I sat at the window, watching the life of an unfamiliar street. In front of me lay a newspaper with advertisements for housing. I circled a few options within the city limits with a red pencil. It was my homework to find out where my children had moved to after I'd made them homeless. The money from the sale of the house came into my account. The amount seemed unreal. I had never had such funds in my life. I withdrew a small amount in cash and hid it in a tea box. I left the rest in the bank where the manager helped me to open a deposit with a good interest rate. Will you be buying a new house, Mrs. Morgenthaler? He asked in a friendly way. No, I shook my head. I've had enough houses. It had been 2 weeks since the move. There had been no word from the kids. Shelley called once, but when she heard my voice, she hung up. I learned from talking to Virna, who still lived in our, now former, neighborhood, that Glenn and his family had rented an apartment in a high-rise on the other side of town. A cramped, one-bedroom apartment where the three of them shared. Darlene's been going darker than a cloud, Verna said with gloating pleasure. They say they tried to take out a mortgage, but the bank turned them down. Glenn has some kind of credit history problem. Shelley, according to her friend, had moved in with her boyfriend Ray, a murky type that no one in the family approved of. He had a small house on the outskirts, and now 6 people lived there. Ray, Shelley, her 3 children, and his oldest son from his first marriage. They converted the garage into a nursery, Verna told me. Brittany complained to my daughter that it was freezing at night. I listened to this news with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I was filled with grim satisfaction. They had gotten what they deserved. On the other, I worried about the grandchildren, especially the youngest, Amber. What would it be like for her to live in cramped quarters with a strange man she barely knew? Don't you have any regrets? Verna asked bluntly. No, I answered, not entirely sure of what I was saying. They left me no choice. But when we said goodbye, I sat for a long time looking at an old picture of Shelley, 7 years old, with her 2 front teeth knocked out, hugging my neck. Motherly love is a strange feeling. Even when your children betray you, hurt you, some part of you still continues to love them. In my new home, I had to get used to unfamiliar sounds and smells. The old plumbing creaked and groaned like arthritic joints. On the 3rd day after moving in, I woke up to the sound of dripping water. The faucet in the kitchen was leaking, and by morning a puddle had formed. I tried to tighten the valve, but it only made things worse. The water was now a thin trickle. The landlord wouldn't answer the phone. I was about to go to the hardware store to get tools when there was a knock at the door. An elderly man in a faded plaid shirt and work pants stood on the threshold. Gray stubble covered his sunken cheeks, and his eyes looked wary, as if expecting a catch. I'm Otis Randall. I live across the street, he said in a husky voice. I hear your plumbing's acting up. Ruth Morgenthaler, I introduced myself. Yeah, the faucet's leaking and the landlord won't pick up the phone. Typical JJ, Otis chuckled. I can take a look at it if you want. I used to be an electrician, but I know a little about plumbing too. I hesitated for a moment. What did I have to lose? Worst case scenario, he wouldn't be able to help. I'd appreciate it, Mr. Randall. Just Otis, he corrected, walking into the kitchen. Otis worked silently and methodically. He took the faucet apart, replaced a gasket he'd pulled from a ragged toolbox, and checked the pressure. It all took less than 20 minutes. Done, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. It's a temporary solution. The landlord will have to change the whole system anyway. The pipes are old. How much do I owe you? I asked, pulling out my wallet. Otis frowned. Nothing. Neighbors are supposed to help each other. Then at least let's have a cup of coffee, I insisted. Or tea. He hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to social interaction. Coffee, if it's not too much trouble. Black. We sat at my small kitchen table, drinking coffee and silent. But it wasn't the awkward silence that occurs between strangers. It was the quiet silence of people who are comfortable in each other's company. How long have you lived here? I finally asked. 7 years, Otis answered. Since I retired, and you just moved in. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. 2 weeks ago? I nodded. Sold the house. A big house? He asked. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, backyard with an apple tree. Otis whistled. And traded for that box? Must be a good reason. I hadn't planned to be frank with the stranger, but there was something about his direct gaze that suggested honesty. My kids wanted to send me to a nursing home and take the house for themselves, I said. I found out about it by accident. I decided to get ahead of them. Otis nodded slowly, as if such a story didn't surprise him. I had a son, too, he said after a pause. He'd be 43 now. He would have been. The past tense stabbed his ears. What happened? I asked quietly. The fire, Otis answered, staring into his cup. 20 years ago, they didn't get him and his wife out in time. He said it plainly, without a hint of frustration. like a text learned long ago and repeated many times. I'm sorry. I instinctively covered his hand with mine. Otis didn't pull away, but he didn't respond to my touch. We were silent again, each absorbed in our own thoughts of loss and regret. What will you do now? He asked at last. With the children, I mean. I shrugged. I don't know. They don't call. They don't come. Maybe that's the way it should be. And the grandchildren? I have 5 of them. I sighed. I miss them. Otis finished his coffee and stood up. Thanks for the coffee, Mrs. Morgenthaler. If you need help with the plumbing again, knock on the wall 3 times. When he left, I felt strangely relieved, as if the story I'd told aloud had become a little less heavy. I'd had few friends in my former life. I'd always been too busy with family, children, home. Maybe now, at 68, it's not too late to learn how to build connections outside the family circle. A few days later, on my way back from the grocery store, I noticed a familiar lanky figure on the landing. Travis was sitting on the steps, nervously fidgeting with the laces of his tattered sneakers. Bah! He jumped up when he saw me. I've been waiting for an hour. Travis? I was confused. How did you find me? My mom has your address saved in her phone. He smiled embarrassedly. She doesn't know I'm here. I unlocked the door and let my grandson into the apartment. He looked around with genuine interest. Nice place you have here. Compact. Have a seat. I pointed to the chair. You want anything? A Coke? A sandwich? No, I won't be long. Travis sank down on the edge of the chair. My parents would kill me if they knew I was here. I put the grocery bags on the kitchen table. How did you get here? It's the other side of town. I took the bus. Travis shrugged. Grams, I just wanted to tell you that I don't agree with them. The parents, I mean. What they wanted to do, it's wrong. I sat down next to him, touched by his words. Thank you, honey, but I don't want you to fight with your parents over me. We fight all the time, Travis grinned bitterly. Our new apartment sucks. 1 bedroom for 3 of us, and I sleep on the couch in the living room. My mom complains all day long that it's all because of you. And my dad. He's trying to sue to contest the sale of the house. He can't, I said firmly. The paperwork's all in order. I know, Travis nodded. But he needs someone to blame. They're telling everyone that you're crazy, that you had dementia and you didn't know what you were doing. I froze. What do you mean, everyone? Well, family, friends. Travis looked down at the floor. My mom even wrote a Facebook post about how hard it is when parents get older and lose touch with reality. Didn't name you directly, but everyone knew who she was talking about. I've been silently digesting this information, so they're trying to smear me, make me look like a crazy old woman. I guess I should have seen it coming. What about Shelley? I asked, trying to speak calmly. I heard she moved in with Ray. Yeah, Travis grimaced. Uncle Ray's kind of a jerk. I'm sorry, Grandma, but he is. He drinks, yells at the kids. Little Amber's scared shitless of him. Brittany ran off to a friend's house this weekend and won't come back. My heart clenched with worry for my grandchildren, but I reminded myself that Shelley was a grown woman, responsible for her choices. Travis, I took his hand. I don't want you to be caught between 2 fires. Maybe you shouldn't come here. No, he threw his head up. You're the only one who really listens to me. All my parents talk about is money and debt and how bad things are. I want to see you. Okay, I give in. But be careful. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. Travis stayed with me for another hour. We talked about his school, his friends, his dream of going to art college. I made him a turkey sandwich, which he devoured in 2 minutes. Apparently, the food was not good at home. As he left, I gave him some money. It's not a bribe, I warned him against protesting. Just in case I needed to go somewhere or buy something. Travis hugged me awkwardly. Thanks, Ba. I'll keep coming, I promise. After he left, the apartment seemed even smaller and quieter. I turned on the TV to fill the void, but my thoughts kept returning to the conversation. Shelley and Glenn were spreading rumors about me, trying to make me look crazy. Maybe they really believed it. It was easier to think your mother had lost her mind than it was to admit that you'd been cruel to her yourself. Late that night, Verna called. Ruth, are you sitting up? She asked without preamble. Yes, why? Shelley published a story in the local paper. Verna's voice shook with indignation. In the private classified section, something like, if you've seen an elderly woman, Ruth Morgenthaler, who may be disoriented, call this number. And a picture of you where you didn't come out very well. What? I almost dropped the phone. But that's slander. Exactly, agreed Verna. I called the editorial office. I was outraged. They apologized, said they hadn't verified the information. But it's done. People have read it. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of anger and pain rising inside. My own kids were trying to make me look like the town crazy. You could sue, Verna suggested, for defamation. And sue my own children? I grinned bitterly. No, Verna, I won't stoop to that. When we finished talking, I sat in the dark for a long time, staring out the window at the passing trains. The lights of the cars flickered like fireflies, carrying freight, people, stories into the night. The next day, I went out to the store and caught glances from my neighbors. Curious, sympathetic, wary. So the rumors had already spread. The cashier, who usually chatted with me about the weather, silently checked out my purchases today, carefully avoiding looking me in the eye. On my way back, I ran into Otis, who was returning from a walk. Did you hear the news? I asked bluntly. About me? He nodded. I've heard, but I know it's bullshit. How can you be so sure? I looked at him curiously. We barely know each other. Crazy people have different eyes, Otis answered simply. I've seen enough to tell the difference. That evening, I took the money out of the jewelry box and counted it. Then I checked my bank account through the new app they'd helped me install at the bank. The funds were there, safely protected. It would be enough for many years of peaceful living, even if I had to hire a lawyer. I knew there was no turning back. The house had already been torn down. Verna had sent a picture of the construction site where the mansion where I'd spent most of my life had once stood. Bulldozers were leveling the ground, preparing it for the foundation of the future mini-market. The apple tree was also cut down, even though I had asked to keep it. It's interfering with communications, the foreman explained. My children will never forgive me. I sold the house where they grew up, condemned them to live in cramped rental apartments, shamed them in front of their friends and acquaintances. In their eyes, I became an enemy, a traitor. But if I hadn't done that, they would have sent me to a nursing home in Spearfish, sold off my belongings, split the money, and no one would have asked me what I wanted. The choice was made. Bridges were burned. Strangely, I found an unexpected calm in that thought. For the first time in years, I acted not as a mother, wife, or grandmother, but as Ruth Morgenthaler, a woman who had the right to decide her own fate. The letter arrived on Wednesday, a plain white envelope with the logo of the law firm Byers, Holt & Associates. I knew immediately that it couldn't be anything good. Dear Mrs. Morgenthaler, you are hereby notified of the commencement of litigation to invalidate the sale of the real property at the address of... My hands shook as I reached the line that said, Glenn Morgenthaler and Shelley Cranston were the plaintiffs. My children are suing me. What followed were legal terms that blended together in front of my eyes. Incapacity at the time of the transaction, evidence of dementia, actions against the interests of the plaintiffs as heirs. I was asked to appear for a preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. I slumped back in my chair, feeling the room begin to spin. They'd really done it. Not just spreading rumors about my dementia, but decided to prove it officially through the courts. They wanted to take away my right to control my own property, my own life. My first impulse was to call them and ask them how they could do such a thing. But what difference would it have made? Deep down, I knew they wouldn't back down. There was too much money at stake. Instead, I dialed Verna's number. My friend arrived 40 minutes later, out of breath and indignant to the core. Give me that letter. She put on her glasses and ran her eyes over the text. Those bastards! I'm sorry, Ruth, but your children are bastards. What am I going to do, Verna? I felt devastated. I have no experience in this kind of thing. I've never dealt with the courts. You need a lawyer and a good one, she said firmly. I had a cousin who was a lawyer, but he moved to Oregon. Maybe he could recommend someone. There was a knock on the door. Otis stood on the doorstep, toolbox in hand. Sorry for the intrusion, he said, looking us over. I heard voices, thought I might need some help. If you specialize in family betrayals, I do. I grinned bitterly. Otis raised an eyebrow questioningly. The children are suing Ruth, Verna explained. They want to challenge the sale of the house on the grounds that she's supposedly incapacitated. That's right. Otis set the toolbox on the floor. May I see the papers? I handed him the letter. He read it carefully, moving his lips at the legal terms. Buyers, he muttered. I know that firm. They specialize in divorce and probate. Not cheap. How do you know that? I wondered. Otis hesitated. Dealt with them. A long time ago. There was so much pain in his voice that Verna and I looked at each other. There is one person who might be able to help you, Otis continued after a pause. Elaine Mackenzie. She specializes in this kind of thing, and she owes me a favor. Are you sure? I asked cautiously. I can pay. I have the money from the sale of the house. I'm sure, Otis nodded. I'll call her today, if you don't mind. The next day, Otis informed me that Elaine Mackenzie had agreed to take my case and was expecting us at her office at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. We took the bus together. Otis, like me, didn't have a car. Elaine Mackenzie's office was in a modern building in the business part of town. The glass doors, the marble floor, the stern receptionist at the front desk. All of it made me feel out of place in my simple blue dress and old-fashioned shoes. Elaine herself appeared to be a middle-aged woman with a short haircut and a shrewd eye. She stood up from the table as we entered and shook hands firmly, first with me, then with Otis. Mrs. Morgenthaler, Otis has spoken briefly about your situation, but I'd like to hear it from you personally. I detailed the story. The overheard conversation about the nursing home, the sale of the house, the children's reaction, the newspaper ads, and finally the lawsuit. They want to declare me incompetent, I finished, feeling a lump in my throat. They want to prove I'm out of my mind so they can get control of the money. Elaine took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen thoughtfully on her notepad. Well, Mrs. Morgenthaler, the situation is clear. Your children are trying to use the standard strategy in these cases to make the elderly parent look incapable of making financial decisions. Courts often side with the children, especially if there's no medical proof of capacity. But I'm sane, I exclaimed. Any doctor will tell you that. That's where we'll start. Elaine nodded. We need a report from an independent psychiatrist. I know a good one who often acts as an expert witness in court. Then we'll gather testimony from people who interact with you on a regular basis. Neighbors, friends, clerks at the stores where you store regularly. Anyone who can testify that you are fully oriented in space and time. Is that enough? Otis asked. Elaine hesitated a moment. Honestly, not always. It would be very helpful if someone close to your children could confirm that they were indeed planning to send you to a nursing home against your will. I thought of Travis. He'd heard my parents talking, knew about their plans. But would I drag a 15-year-old boy into a legal battle against his own parents? There may be such a person, I said uncertainly. But that's my grandson. I don't want to put him in that position. It's up to you, Elaine shrugged. But the testimony of a family member, especially a minor who has no financial interest in the case, can make a big difference in the outcome. After the meeting, Otis and I walked in silence to the bus stop. I felt devastated and scared. The struggle ahead seemed overwhelming. Elaine's a good lawyer, Otis finally said. If anyone can help, it's her. How do you know her? I decided to ask. Forgive my curiosity, but Verna was right. It didn't seem like electricians were in frequent contact with such lawyers. Otis was silent for a long time, and I thought he wouldn't answer. But when we got on the bus, he spoke in a quiet, monotone voice. After the fire that killed Lisa and Jason, my son and daughter-in-law, the insurance company refused to pay compensation. Claimed it was arson, that I started the fire myself. I gasped. But that's crazy. Otis nodded. I loved my son more than my life. But they had some experts who claimed that the fire was started by a short circuit that I, as an electrician, could have set intentionally. They sued me for damages to the neighbors. I could have lost everything, including my freedom. And Elaine helped you? She was a young lawyer then, but she had a bulldog reputation. Took my case when no one else would. Found a real expert who proved it was a defective electric heater. The manufacturer covered up a defect that had already caused several fires. Otis was looking out the bus window, but I doubted he saw the houses and trees floating by. She won the case. The insurance company paid the settlement, and we got a decent amount of money from the heater manufacturer for moral damages. But nothing could bring Lisa and Jason back. I'm so sorry. I touched his arm gently. You know what the worst part is? Otis finally turned to me, and I could see the frozen pain in his eyes. I bought that heater. I picked it out myself. I installed it myself. I wanted them to be warm in their new home. Now I understood why Otis had decided to help me. He knew what it was like to be betrayed by the people closest to you, when the whole world thought you were guilty or crazy. Knew the price of justice. Over the next few days, I underwent medical exams, met with a psychiatrist, and gathered paperwork. Elaine worked quickly and methodically, preparing our defense. Otis often accompanied me, a silent but reliable support. Travis continued to visit me despite my parents' inhibitions. He told me that the atmosphere at home was getting more and more tense. All they talk about is the trial, he said during one of his visits. Mom's sure she's going to win, telling everyone what a big bedroom she's going to make in the old house when she gets it back. It's already been torn down, Travis, I reminded him. They're building a mini-mart there. She thinks she'll get the money, my grandson shrugged. She says she's going to use the money to buy a new house, an even better one. I looked at his thin, tense face and knew I had to ask. Travis, did you hear your parents discussing plans to put me in a nursing home? He frowned. Yes, more than once. Dad even went to Spearfish, looked at some place there, said it was for your own good, that you weren't doing well on your own. You could have, I stammered, not knowing how to phrase the request. Could you tell the court about it? Travis froze. You want me to testify against my parents? I realize I'm asking the impossible. I shook my head. Forget it. It's too hard a choice for you. No, Travis said firmly. I'll do it. I'll tell the truth. Travis, think about it. This could ruin your relationship with your parents forever. It already has. He grinned bitterly. Ever since I found out what they wanted to do to you. To hear their lies every day, to see them planning to take your money, I can't pretend anymore. I hugged him, feeling tears come to my eyes. No matter what happens, I'll always be on your side, I promised. The day of the trial came quickly. The room was small but formal. Wooden benches, a judge's desk on a dais, an American flag in the corner. Glenn and Shelley sat on one side of the aisle with their attorney, Elaine and I on the other. Otis settled right behind me. Glenn looked at me with poorly concealed anger. Shelley avoided my gaze, nervously rubbing the strap of her purse. In the front row behind them sat Darlene, dressed like she was going to a funeral in a strict black suit. She was whispering something in the ear of the woman next to her, occasionally throwing me an angry glance. Travis was supposed to come in later just to testify. We figured it was for the best. The hearing began with opening statements from the attorneys. Glenn and Shelley's lawyer, Mr. Byers, a gaunt man with balding hair, talked about the tragedy of aging, how hard it is to see when a parent loses the ability to make rational decisions. He listed the signs of dementia my children supposedly observed: forgetfulness, mood swings, irrational behaviors. He placed particular emphasis on the sale of the house, a clearly unprofitable transaction made in a state of clouded consciousness. Elaine was brief and specific in her presentation. She presented the court with medical reports proving my full legal capacity, bank statements showing that I was a sound financial manager, and testimony from neighbors about my good behavior. Your Honor, she concluded, this case is not about the children's concern for their mother, but about an attempt to take possession of money from the sale of property that belonged solely to Mrs. Morgenthaler. The questioning of witnesses then began. Glenn and Shelley took turns telling how they had noticed my degradation, how I was forgetting the names of people I knew, confusing the days of the week, making irrational decisions. Darlene corroborated their testimony, adding that I often talked nonsense and could stare at one point for hours. I listened to these lies through gritted teeth. Elaine, cross-examining them, got them to admit that none of them had seen a doctor about my condition or tried to arrange a medical examination. If you were so concerned about your mother's health, why didn't you consult a specialist? She asked Glenn. We were going to, he replied uncertainly, but we didn't have time. She suddenly sold the house. Suddenly? Elaine raised an eyebrow. 3 weeks after your wife told her she'd soon be in a nursing home? Glenn turned pale. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Elaine turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have a witness who can shed light on the plaintiff's true motives. Travis entered the room. He was pale, but he kept a straight face. My heart sank when I saw the look of shock and betrayal on Glenn's face. Travis, sworn in, told me about overheard conversations, about my father's trip to Spearfish to look at the nursing home, about my parents' plans to dispose of my money. They said Dad would use the money from the sale of Grandma's house to buy Mom a new car, he said in a shaky voice. And they would send Grandma to some cheap place far away from the city so she wouldn't get in the way. Travis's cross-examination was agonizing. Glenn's lawyer tried to make him look like a resentful teenager taking revenge on his parents for some imagined offense. But Travis held firm, answering clearly and calmly. As he finished his testimony, Glenn and I crossed our gazes. I had never seen such hatred in my own son's eyes. After closing arguments, the court retired to make its decision. We waited in the hallway, me, Elaine, Otis, and Travis, keeping apart from Glenn, Shelley, and their support group. Whatever the judge decides, you should be proud of yourself, Otis said to Travis. Not every adult would have had the courage to do what you did. Travis smiled weakly. Thank you, but I don't feel brave. I just couldn't listen to their lies anymore. The decision was announced an hour later. The judge dismissed the lawsuit, finding me fully competent in upholding the legality of the sale of the house. He emphasized Travis's testimony, calling it compelling and sincere. The court finds no basis for declaring Mrs. Morgenthaler incompetent, he concluded. On the contrary, her actions to protect her own interests demonstrate a clear mind and the ability to make informed decisions. Elaine squeezed my shoulder victoriously. Otis nodded with satisfaction, but I felt no joy. Glenn and Shelley left the room without looking in my direction. Darlene, walking past, hissed, You're going to regret this, old woman. We all will. Only Travis remained standing next to me, confused and devastated. What now? He asked quietly. I'm not going home, that's for sure. I hugged him. You'll stay with me for now. We'll decide later. As we walked out of the courthouse, I looked back. Glenn was standing by his car, hugging a crying Shelley tightly. I wanted to walk over, to say something, maybe offer peace, a compromise, but the look on his face stopped me. There was no room for forgiveness there. I'd won the trial, kept my money and the right to control my life. But the price was high. I lost my children, finally, and it seems irrevocably. 6 months have passed since the day the judge hit the gavel, ending my struggle with my children. 6 months of new, unfamiliar freedom. Winter changed to spring, spring to summer. Life went on according to its inexorable laws. On this clear July day, I stood behind the fence of the construction site, watching the workers finish pouring the foundation of the future mini-market. Not so long ago, my house stood here, a 2-story house with a veranda and an apple tree in the yard. Now there was no trace of it, just a flat area of fresh concrete. Did you live here? The foreman asked me, noticing how long I had been standing at the fence. Yes, I nodded. 36 years. He shook his head sympathetically. It must be hard to see that. A lot of old people cry when their houses are torn down. I'm 68, not 98. I smiled to soften the harshness of my words. And I sold the house for demolition myself. The foreman raised his eyebrows in surprise. An unusual decision. Unusual circumstances, I shrugged. He went back to work, and I stood for a while longer, staring at the concrete slab. Strangely, I felt neither bitterness nor regret, more like a sort of lightness. That house held happy memories, but also the pain of betrayal. Now it was gone, and it felt right. My apartment on the outskirts of the city no longer looked like a temporary refuge. I'd added flowers, pots of geraniums and violets on the windowsills, and paintings I'd bought at the local fair. One of them, a watercolor of a mountain landscape, was especially dear to me. Travis had painted it before he left. My grandson lived with me for 3 months after the trial. Glenn did not try to get his son back. On the contrary, he declared that a traitor has no place in their home. Travis and I were getting used to each other, learning to live together. Sometimes it was difficult. After all, there was a 53-year gap between us. But more often we found common ground. Travis painted a lot, and I cooked his favorite dishes. In the evenings, we watched old movies or just talked. In April, Travis received a letter from the Denver Art School. He had been accepted into a program for gifted teens with on-campus housing. The joy on his face when he showed me the envelope was worth all the money I paid for tuition. We didn't talk about it explicitly, but he guessed. The day I left, he hugged me tighter than usual. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered in my ear, "for everything." Now he called every week, talking about his classes, his new friends, his teachers. His voice sounded more alive than ever, like he'd finally found his place in the world. I hadn't heard from Glenn and Shelley in a long time. I knew from Verna that my son had bought a small house on the outskirts of town, a much smaller house, but still his own. Shelley was still living with Ray, though their relationship was becoming increasingly strained. The letter from Glenn came unexpectedly, a plain white envelope with a neatly printed address. Inside was a doubled folded piece of paper and a check. "Mom," Glenn wrote, "enough time has passed for emotions to settle. I realize that you may have found our actions offensive, though we were motivated solely by concern for your well-being. Travis probably misinterpreted our conversations due to his adolescent maximalism. Nevertheless, I recognize that we could have been more considerate of your wishes. I hope you can find the strength to forgive us. I'll refund the money I spent on the lawyer. That seems fair. Respectfully, Glenn." Not a word about the fact that they were actually planning to send me to a nursing home. Not an ounce of genuine remorse. And that signature, "respectfully," like a business letter. Like I was a stranger, not the mother who changed his diapers and stayed up nights when he had a fever. I tore up the check and threw it away. I didn't need the money, and I didn't want to accept such an apology. A week after Glenn's letter, Shelley showed up. No warning, just rang the doorbell on an early Saturday morning. I barely recognized my daughter. She looked older than her 40s, gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. "Mom," she breathed, shuffling from foot to foot in the doorway. "Can I come in?" I silently stepped aside to let her into the apartment. Shelley looked around with ill-concealed surprise. "It's cozy." "Thank you." I pointed to the chair. "Have a seat. Tea, coffee?" "Coffee, if I may." While I fiddled with the coffee maker, Shelley fidgeted with the strap of her purse. She'd obviously come for a purpose, but she didn't know how to start a conversation. "How are the kids?" I asked, setting the cup in front of her. "They're fine." She took a sip. Brittany got into college. Kyle had gotten bigger in the last 6 months, taller than me. Amber started kindergarten. "That's good to hear." I nodded. "How are things with Ray?" "We broke up a month ago. He's not the man he said he was." "I'm sorry," I said, though I was actually glad. Ray and his alcohol problems weren't a good match for my daughter. "Mom," Shelley set the cup down and looked me straight in the eye. "I want to apologize for everything that happened. Glenn and we were wrong." There was a sincerity in her voice that wasn't in Glenn's letter, but there was still something about it that made me uneasy. "I'm glad to hear that, Shelley," I replied carefully. "We can't go back to the past, but maybe we can build a new relationship." "Exactly," she said enthusiastically. "We can be a family again. I missed you so much, Mom. And so have the kids. Especially Amber, she keeps asking about Grandma." I stayed silent, waiting for the rest of the story. It didn't take long. After I broke up with Ray, I had to move out. We're renting an apartment now, but it's so expensive, especially with 3 kids," Shelley sighed. "And I was thinking, maybe you could help us with a down payment on a house?" I found a great deal. Inexpensive. But the bank requires a minimum of 20%. That's it. Not reconciliation, money. It was all about money again. "I take it you're not here to reconcile, but to ask for money," I said bluntly. Shelley blushed. "No. Yes, I want to make up, and the help, it's just proof that you've forgiven us. Does the proof have to be money? Mom, don't twist things around. She was getting annoyed. You've always helped us. Why should it be any different now? Because always ended when you and Glenn decided to put me in a nursing home and take my house, I answered calmly. Because you sued me, spread rumors about my dementia, and disowned your own son when he took my side. But you won, Shelley exclaimed. You got everything you wanted. What do you think I wanted? Money, freedom, revenge, she blurted out. I shook my head. I wanted respect, Shelley. Recognition of my right to control my own life. I never got that. Shelley stood up, pushing her chair back sharply. I knew it. You'll never forgive us. All this, she circled the room, is just decoration. You've turned into a vindictive, vengeful old woman. You're wrong, I stood up too. I will forgive you when I see sincere contrition. Not a formal apology in a letter, not a request for money disguised as reconciliation, but a real understanding of what you've done. Shelley grabbed her purse. You know what? Glenn was right. You're impossible to understand. You don't know what you want. I do, I countered. I want to be a mother and grandmother, not an ATM machine or a free babysitter. I want you to come to me not just when you need something. As the door slammed shut behind Shelley, I sank into the chair, feeling strangely empty. Part of me hoped that my daughter had really come to make up, but it seemed our ideas of reconciliation were very different. In the evening, Otis stopped by to see me. Over the past few months, our relationship had changed from casual neighbors to close friends. He often came over for a cup of coffee, helped with minor repairs. Sometimes we went to the movies together or just walked through the park. That same night, Otis kissed me for the first time, awkwardly, tentatively, as if he'd learned how to do it over the years of being alone. I responded just as awkwardly. We were both long past the age of passion. But there was something more precious in that kiss understanding, acceptance, the commonality of souls that had been through loss and pain. Our relationship developed slowly, without haste or drama. Otis stayed overnight at my place, and I sometimes slept at his apartment. We didn't make far-reaching plans. At our age, the future always looks more fragile than when we were younger. But we learned to appreciate every day, every conversation, every breakfast together. In September, Verna suggested we fulfill a longtime dream, a trip to Alaska. Remember how we talked about it when Hank was still alive? She asked, laying out travel brochures on my desk. You kept putting it off because Glenn was going to college, and then Shelley had to help with the kids. Now is the time, Ruth. I flipped through the glossy pages with pictures of snow-capped mountains, fjords, northern lights. 40 years ago, Hank and I had dreamed of this trip. He even put money aside in a special jar labeled Alaska. But there was always something more important. The kids, the house, the bills. And then Hank died, and the dream was buried along with all the other unfulfilled plans. Let's go, I said. In October when it's not too cold, but you can see the northern lights. Verna shone. I'll book the tickets tomorrow. When she left, I told Otis about the plan. He listened and asked, Can I join you? I smiled. Sure, I think Verna would enjoy the company. We began to prepare for the trip, bought warm clothes, studied guidebooks, watched documentaries about Alaska. On one of those nights when Otis and I were sitting on the couch discussing the route, I suddenly realized that I was happy. Not the unbridled joy that happens in youth, but the calm, deep happiness of a man who has found his place in the world. What are you thinking about? Otis asked, noticing my gaze. About how strange things have turned out, I answered. A year ago, I was a prisoner in my own home, surrounded by a family who saw me only as a burden. Now I'm free, planning a dream trip and next to you. Otis touched my cheek lightly. You never know where you'll find something and where you'll lose it. I thought my life ended the day I lost my son. And now, in the evening, while packing my suitcase for a trip, I came across an old photo album. On the last page was a picture taken a month before Hank died. Us sitting on that very bench under the apple tree, holding hands. Aged, but happy. I carefully removed the photo and put it in my wallet. Tomorrow I'll be heading to Alaska to fulfill the dream we once shared with Hank. I'll have Verna and Otis by my side, the new family I've found at 68. And the old bench will remain in the marquee, a silent witness to the fact that even when houses fall apart, something indestructible remains: memory, love, the will to live. Because a real home is not walls and a roof. It's what we carry inside us, what stays with us even when everything around us turns to ashes. And sometimes we need to burn bridges in order to build new ones, stronger ones, leading to the future, which we choose ourselves.